The Uber driver wasn't sure what to do when the Lebanese cowboys ambushed him. He just arrived at his destination at the old port of Montreal when 5 men clad in cowboy hats, plaid shirts, and bandanas rushed his car and pounded on the window. While the cowboys distracted the driver, his passenger snatched the smartphone from the dashboard bracket and exited the car. He then handed the phone to the posse's leader, Hassan Katwa, whose authority was made plain by the plastic star on his vest and the toy pistol on his belt. The costumed lawman pocketed the phone and handed the bewildered driver a receipt printed on paper that had been soaked in tea and burned on the edges with a cigarette lighter. The document read, "We have seized the machine that you are using as a weapon for your outlaw activity that is impoverishing drivers in towns and cities. You will retrieve your weapon as soon as the governor of the province and/or his minister outlaw and ban the illegal activities you are engaged in, and the province returns to the rule of law that it is famous for." This was the autumn of 2015. Uber had been operating illegally in Montreal for about a year. The city's taxi bureau had issued thousands of dollars in fines and seized more than 200 cars, But the penalties hardly dissuaded Uber's drivers. Montreal cabbies were furious. "They have turned Quebec into the Wild West," Hassan told a journalist covering his cell phone heist. Hassan turned back to the Uber driver and informed him that if he wanted his phone returned, he needed to take the singed receipt to the taxi bureau. After the driver sped away, Hassan pinned a mock wanted poster depicting Montreal Uber manager, complete with black hat and villain's mustache, to a tree. Then he and his scowling deputies posed for a photo. Hassan reasoned that when the Uber driver appeared at the bureau to retrieve his phone, he'd have to admit he'd been driving for Uber and therefore would receive a ticket. But this wasn't enough for Hassan. "I wanted to punish him just a little bit more," Hassan told me. He planned to hold onto the phone for 3 days before bringing it to the bureau. That way, the driver would lose a few days' worth of income. Besides, the delay adhered to the operation's cowboy aesthetic. "It is as if I sent the phone by horseback," Hassan said. "It takes some time." Montreal's real police were not amused. As soon as the story of his ambush appeared in Le Journal de Montréal under the headline, "Cowboy Taxi Driver Steals Cell Phone from Uber X," the police called Hassan. They ordered him and his accomplices to report to the police station or face arrest. Hassan summoned his posse and told them to suit up. When the 4 cowboys arrived at the station, dressed again in their cowboy costumes, a local television station was waiting. "I regret not spending a bit more on the outfits," Hassan told me. "They were all from the dollar store, but I did not know we would be on TV." Police officers crowded the station entrance to watch the spectacle. The rest of Hassan's posse was terrified. They knew they could lose their work permits if they received criminal records. In the end, though, the police didn't charge anyone with anything. They simply scolded the men and demanded Hassan return the stolen phone. "They told me they knew I wasn't a criminal," Hassan said. "But that was the day I became the taxi sheriff."
In 1964, tragedy struck. My Uncle Patrick, the favored son, was killed. He was 14 at the time, on his way home from his job at the stationery store. As he cycled past the corner of Dundas and Shaw, a car collided with him and threw him from his bike, bashing his head on the concrete. He was rushed to sick kids but died the next day. Everyone in my family fell into depression after Patrick died. He was always in song and carried his guitar with him, always cheerful, my grandfather once told me. He would say the most remarkable things about Jesus. After he lost Patrick, my grandfather relied increasingly on faith healing to help himself and his family get through the tragedy. At hospital visits and home visits, he insisted on healing the sick, praying and laying his hands on their wounds, whipping himself into hysteria. Within a couple of years, he had become obsessed with the idea of the devil and exorcisms. He often claimed to hear voices to which he turned to for guidance. In 1966, he had formed a close-knit group of followers who subscribed to his form of faith-healing Christianity. He called it the Ministry of Healing. He was assisted by Doug Tisdall, a young Anglican priest whose father, Frederick Tisdall, was one of the inventors of Pablo. Doug had been involved in charismatic Christianity from a young age, praying in tongues and practicing faith healing before he was ordained priest in 1965. And then there was a third member, Marjorie Rogers. Her brown hair and a tall bouffant provided counsel for members. She was middle class, and basically would be the all-wise matriarch of this group. According to some members, she would perform what the group called potting out, going into a kind of trance, howling like a dog, and chanting. That behavior indicated that there was demonic energy in the room and helped her sniff out who in the group was possessed. She was reportedly only able to come out of it when other members laid their hands on her and prayed loudly until she was herself again. Once she even suggested that my grandfather and Doug were off and sent them to a motel for the night until they were back to normal. I reached out to Marjorie, now in her 80s, for comment on the story. She confirmed that she possessed the gift of discernment, but denied she ever entered trances. One woman, a 19-year-old mother of two, brought her kids to live with Marjorie and Doug after my grandfather had convinced her that living with her parents was evil. He prayed all the hell and atmosphere out of my clothes and belongings, she later said. During her first night at the house, she woke up convinced the devil was in her bedroom, which Marjorie confirmed. Right then and there at 4 a.m., the priest came and baptized her with holy oils. Another young woman had been married married at 14 and later separated from her husband and two children. She'd attempted suicide by shooting herself, and the bullet had lodged in her spine, causing her to limp. Her ex-neighbor, a cult member, told her the residual pain indicated that there was evil in her body and introduced her to one of the priests. When he touched her leg, she claimed the pain went away. While living at the rectory, she coughed up blood one night. That's hell coming through you, the priest
Hair
told her.
grows at a rate of half an inch per month. Nothing you can do to change that. Still, Porsche pulled it back into a tight ponytail after showering because she thought it would grow faster. The skin around her hairline was raw from the tension, but she was proud of her hair. Long and red, it was, she said, the most consistent thing in her life. Porsche was a prostitute. Escort, she said, correcting me the first time I used the word. I mean, yeah, it's pretty much the same thing, but we don't just fuck them. Our guys want the girlfriend experience. Escort had been the word used in the classified ad, which had been tucked away in the back of the newspaper. I'd called the service, got the address, and set up a meeting. Escort was the word that had drawn me in. If the ad had called for prostitutes, I would never have inquired. I wasn't totally naive. I knew that escorts had sex for money. I just hoped that maybe there were some who really got paid to go on dates with lonely men. As someone practiced in the art of self-deception, I told myself this over and over on the day between making the appointment for my interview and the interview itself. It strengthened my resolve. Cynthia, the woman who managed the service, took one look at me when I walked through the door and said, "So, tell me your problem." My ex-boyfriend thought that my problem was I'd never planned my life after university, that I didn't know what I wanted. After graduation, I tried to make the boomerang backtrack to my parents' home, but unless I was slinging a shoulder of Smirnoff in my purse, the lack of prospects at my parents was unbearable. I'd expected to immediately land some prestigious job, but in all my time studying humanities, I hadn't considered any practical application for my degree. This oversight was humiliating, especially since I'd been so confident that I'd chosen the right path by going against my father's wishes and deciding to pursue a life of literature instead of law. I was certain a place in the world would open for me. My degree was supposed to have made me stronger and more assured, but I was more lost than ever. Then there was my ex-boyfriend. I can't remember whether I ever told him this, but one of the reasons I left my parents and took a job in another city was to be nearer to him. I'd sit on the edge of his bed while he slept, sprawled, and try to imagine his arm outstretched like that for me. Within a few weeks of leaving my parents' home again, he wasn't my boyfriend anymore. It was too much, he'd said. I was too much. I was sitting in front of Cynthia and she was shaking her head knowingly. Men, Cynthia had said. Cynthia had a rough smoker's laugh. Figures. But he wasn't the only reason I was there. I was offered a position as a writer for a media company. I thought finally my degree and desires would align with my reality. My elation was undercut by my father's suspicions. He thinks you're up to something, my mom had said. What could I possibly be up to, I asked, but I already knew. It was the same thing my father always thought women were up to when they wanted their independence. It's because you mentioned that boy there, my mom explained. Your father thinks it's the only reason you went back, driven by your, well, I can't say, but you know, my vagina. Yes. He thinks I'm behaving like a whore. Yes. I felt reduced to a guileless, malleable mound of flesh with doll-hinged legs. I didn't want to believe my father would think these things of me, never mind women in general. But he did. I knew he did. and I knew no amount of discussion would ever change his mind. I tried before, and even if I was talking, I could see that he thought I was spewing lies fueled by my base biological instinct.